Anyway, so, okay, our next race is 112, because we are going to go in first name, alphabetical order again. We'll start with Andy. He is the incumbent in 112, down there in the Richardson and Garland area.
Good evening. Right. It is so wonderful to be at the North Texas Tea Party meeting tonight. Believe it or not, Mr. Michael Openshaw and I, and actually my husband and his lovely wife, 20 years ago, we used to run into each other at a Chinese restaurant. And we never dreamed about what we hear, that he's having the tea party here, and I am your state representative for District 112. It's very easy to remember my name. According to my husband, I used to be as cute as a button. Now I am the right button to push and get great things done. Right? My district covers Richardson, Garland, Saxon, Rowlett, inside the Dallas County. I am currently in my third term, and it is so wonderful, and I'm so proud to endorse my colleague Ben Teller to run for the senatorial seat, and I am extremely appreciative that he endorsed me for my re-election because we share the same value, being conservative. Listen, you are going to, because this is a big party event, nobody's going to show up and say they are not conservative. We will still say that. But listen, I know you all are very smart. You all check on the records. Is that right? People cannot stand here and brag about, being a conservative, but then go to raise a bunch of taxes. During my 4.5 years of service in the Texas House, I have never voted to raise any taxes. Instead, let me just share a little story. One time I was in the committee meeting, that was 2 years ago during the economic downturn. Remember that? The one liberal Democrat state representative, she said, how about the income tax? I don't care if I have to follow the protocol or not. I stopped her right there. I said, lady, don't even talk about that. This is in Texas. We don't do things this way. Just want you to know one thing I'm extremely proud is during this session, I am one of the key authors for House Bill 500 and House Bill 800 that gives the margin tax break and also R&D tax reform. I was able to author this bill as a joint author and give the taxpayers $1 billion tax relief. $1 billion tax relief. During the economic downturn, how many of you have family members, neighbors, and friends suffered from the layoffs? My own brother, he has 3 degrees, but when the economy goes bad, doesn't matter how many degrees you have. And I believe the only way to bring jobs back is to give taxpayers a cut, and that automatically will generate more jobs. So that the franchise tax reform gets to benefit most small businesses. Okay? Well, I guess by now you probably figured out that I speak charming English. So let me give you a little bit of background. My parents that escaped the communists from China back in 1949, and I was born in Taiwan and raised in Taiwan. And then I came to UTD for my graduate study and met this wonderful fellow, my classmate, and we have been married for 32 years. How about that? And he still loves me. And actually, this is so funny because earlier, I guess one of the candidates talked about the voter ID. I want you to know, last session, when we were debating about the voter ID on the floor, it was so interesting. As you can tell, some liberal Democrats try to tap on the, voter ID is bad for minorities like that. I went to the back line. I spoke up. I said, last weekend, I went back to my district, had a district roundtables, inviting people from the minority community and talk to them and ask what's the impact for photo ID. 100% all say, yes, we are all for voter ID. And one gentleman, he's about probably 70, he even insisted that we need to bring out his citizenship paper to the polling place to demonstrate he is a 100% citizen. Voting right is a privilege. It's not an entitlement. And I fought so hard over there. And there's a little story about my husband, okay? When we were doing this, and during one of the committee meetings to talk about the voter ID, a liberal Obama, actually this guy, he really used to be a member of the Obama's campaign team. Now he's running for Representative Strama seat in Austin, a liberal guy. And he tricked one of the conservative Republican representative in the committee. Please understand, sometimes past 12 o'clock, the brain doesn't always work that well. So he tricked this nice lady by saying, that's not what exactly she said. But let me tell you, the next morning, when I walk down to the chamber floor, I'm always one of the early birds, and mentality testified that he's one of the early birds too, because we take this job so seriously. And the liberal Democrat representative from Dallas put me on the side, and he said, well, did you watch the news? We heard that the Republicans are out there to force you, to ask you Asian Americans to change your names. You remember it on the newspaper and on the TV? And I look at this guy and I said, the last time a Republican asked me to change my name is when my husband Not a social issue, very important. Representative Jody Lowringer. She's my dear friend, wonderful lady. When we were fighting so hard on the floor for the pro-life bill, I was standing right there because I think it's important to demonstrate that women, we are supporting this bill. And Michael, earlier you mentioned that you were out there and actually helped to evacuate over 300 people.
Oh yeah.
It was a bad house, huh?
That was the most obscene display of behavior I've ever seen on part of everybody all wearing orange.
So we are very happy we got passed. I know that you're running out of time, but I'm going to share one more story because earlier you were standing here and you asked about the health and human services cost control. I want you to be proud of me. You know, it's wonderful to come to the conservative meetings, the Tea Party events, because you and I share the same concept, share the same values, same beliefs. It's also easy to communicate. But let me tell you this, I only feel God, nobody else. The other day, I was invited to go to this senior source meetings and talk about legislative issues. Guess what? A bunch of liberal, Democrat, Senator reps right there. And they started to show the PowerPoint presentation. They offered this bill to give this social program, that bill to give so much money. I got up and I said, have you all heard about that? It takes money. It takes taxpayers' money. Somebody got to pay for it. And then there were several people knocking that. I know the majority are Democrats, but and some people, my husband said, oh, don't go over there. It's the campaign time. You need to get where you can get your voters. But I said, it's my responsibility to go to tell the facts. Because some people, they might be independent, but some people, if they don't hear the other side of the story, they will always think that their side of the story is good. Okay, so I'm going to conclude my little talk here, and I want you to know that I work hard for you, and I am just so appreciative. Imagine this. Again, my wonderful husband said, he said, if he is the person, grow up, when he grew up in Kansas, and come to Kansas about 35 years ago in Kansas, and, that's right, Bob Duel's country, that's right.
Bob Dole. Word for him.
I talk to you about my meeting with Senator Barry Goldwater, but he said, ask me next time, okay? So, he said that if he is the one to grow up here and then wants to go to some other countries to run for a public office, later on in life, he said he probably will only get one vote. That's for himself, or maybe additional one that's for me. But I am here. A lot of people did ask me, have you ever faced discrimination? See, I'm the one and only Asian American state representative. There are 3 Asian American state representatives. I'm the one and only Republican Asian American state representative. And the Republican National Committee's chairman, Tribus, asked me to help to get Asian American vote. But let me tell you this. This will only happen to this country, the greatest country on earth. And I'm fighting for the values. I want my children, my grandchildren will continue to be proud of being a citizen of this country. So, absolutely, I am here to serve you. I am here to serve you. And I'm a good listener. Thank you for having me. Just one question. Oh, good question. Richardson, Garland, Saxon, and Wallach within the Dallas County. Within the Dallas County. See, he's the boss. And I also have a long list of conservative endorsements and also, a bunch of awards like then, but I think we're running out of time. So next time.
Next time. Well, these are all introductory sessions. We will have formal campaign.
Yeah, but think about that. Van Teller is endorsing me. Okay, thank you.
And I will hear from Jared. It is pronounced Jared, right? Gosh, I'm horrible pronouncing. I can't even pronounce my own name sometimes. Patterson, who is also running for the seat, and he will talk about why he's running.
Hi folks, how are you doing tonight? Good. Appreciate y'all coming out. My name is Jared Patterson. I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, and I'm a Republican, and in that order. And that's very important. For the last 4 years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to serve the citizens of Saxe on the Saxe, Texas City Council. Saxe is a real small town up in northeast Dallas County. Any of y'all live in Dallas County currently? Couple? Okay. Saxe is a real small town, and I chose it because it's a safe place to live, a safe place to establish some roots and establish a family. My wife's name is Leslie Patterson. She taught school for 6 years. She stays at home with our 2 boys. Now, my oldest boy, his name is Reagan. My second boy, his name is Austin. We've got a very young family. Just kind of starting out. I got involved in my community at first. I wasn't mad about anything. I wasn't frustrated about anything. I was just wanting to serve my community. There was an open seat. I had been attending council meetings for a while. I had the opportunity to serve on planning and zoning. And at that point, I decided to go ahead and make the effort in serving on the city council. Ended up winning a runoff election there, and I did have the opportunity to serve for 4 years, elected in 2 terms. As I mentioned earlier, we have a young family. My oldest boy will turn 3 in October. And when my wife and I started having kids, we started kind of paying attention to the bigger picture items, You think, well, we've got all these Republicans down in Austin, they're the good guys, they're putting on a good fight, right? Right? That's what I thought. I had a laser focus on my community, trying to make my community better. And, I thought, well, the Republicans, they're taking care of things down in Austin. Well, I've got to say, I was approached late last year about looking at running this race. And so I sat back, I talked to family about it, I talked to friends about it, I talked to neighbors about it. We prayed a lot about this decision. And so I sat back and I said, you know what, I'm going to wait, I'm going to watch and see what happens this legislative session as I'm talking to folks. Let's see what happens this legislative session. So at that point, I want to break and offer a little story. How many of you have ever had a job where you received a paycheck? Ever? So picture this, right? Your boss calls you right before the start of the year, and you got a 26% raise for this year. 26% raise in your salary. That's amazing, right? Can you imagine that? 26%. So you and your spouse are sitting there and you're thinking your budget for the year. And you think, we're going to take this lavish vacation, we're going to hire help around the house, and we're going to get the kids everything they've ever asked for. And you craft this budget. And then when you're done, you think, well, we forgot to put in money for the mortgage and for the food bills. Would that ever happen to you? Would that ever happen to your family when you're crafting your budget? That's exactly what happened in Austin this session. The state of Texas had a 26% increase in revenue this year. Huge increase in revenue, right? Everybody read about that? Huge increase. Largest revenue increase in the history of the state. Yet when it came to water and transportation, the two most important items to the future of our state, or two of, with education, two of the most important items, were those budgeted for? Or did we draw down the rainy day in half to pay for those essentials for state government? That's why I'm running for this seat. I'm running because I have small children, and I don't want to wake up when I'm 50 or 60 or 70 years old and say, what the heck happened to my state? We're already saying that about our country. I don't want to say it about Texas. We're the last great hope for this United States. We're it, folks. Texas. Texas is it. And we've got major crises, from water to transportation to energy that nobody's even talking about. We have major issues to address. Look, we're doing a lot of things right. We're staying off the oil and gas sector. They're doing great. They're booming. They're providing that backbone for our economy. We're doing a lot of things right. But when it comes to spending and keeping government under control, well, we're just lost in the woods. And so I want to help provide that leadership. I want to stand with those 30 Republicans. 30 Republicans, one of the largest dissenting votes in the history of our state from the majority party on the budget. We had 30 Republicans stand up and say, no, we're not going to take this spending increase. We're not going to take this. 30 Republicans. My opponent is not one of those. 26% increase in spending and did not address fundamental issues in our state. My kids can't afford that. Your kids can't afford that. Your grandkids can't afford that. So that's why I'm running. I'm passionate about this. I'm concerned about the future. But look, I love Texas. We've got a great state here. We just can't screw it up. It wasn't that long ago that California and Michigan were great states too. They were doing fine. They had all the money in the world. But look at the situation that they're in. We can't afford to wait any longer. We have to address these issues now. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about my city council tenure. I served there for 4 years on the city council. I moved to Saxe in 2007. All right, 2007, I moved to Saxe. In 2006, there was a bond election passed. In 2006, there was a bond election passed. $38 million bonds. $38 million. Our annual budget at the time was $20 million. Now, we can have a conversation all day long about the debt problem in this state. And by the way, that $2 billion that's set aside in the water fund, that's just for municipalities and local governments to accrue more debt. That's not solving anything. Let's borrow more money off of that $2 billion. So we had a bond passed in 2006. I moved to Saxe in 2007. And in 2009 and in 2011, we had to vote to raise taxes a significant amount of money to cover that debt. To cover that obligation that was set into place before I even lived in Saxe and before I was sworn in to the city council in July 2009, all the bonds were sold. So we had to face a tough decision. What did we do? We had to pass along the tax increases. That's what the citizens voted for. That's what state law called for. And quite frankly, if we didn't, we would have bankrupted our city and we'd have been like a 40. So there's a lot of things out there about who's the real conservative, who's not the real conservative. If you look at my record, I voted to raise taxes twice. That's a true statement. I was beholden to the decisions that were made before I was elected and put on that city council. But I can tell you this. I have cut $25 line items from the budget. I have cut spending. I know what that's like. That's the passion that I bring. I would not have voted for this budget that we had. I don't believe that many of the conservatives around the state voted for that. In fact, my consultant is a gentleman named Luke Macias. He represents some of the most conservative state representatives in the House. A guy named Jonathan Stickland was rated the most conservative member of the House. Guys like Matt Krause, Giovanni Briglione, Stephanie Flick. You probably heard some of these names. These are the ones that stood up and said, we're not going to take this anymore. I'm going to strengthen their ranks if I'm elected. I'm going to strengthen their ranks, and I'm going to work hard to cut spending and get back to fundamental responsibilities of state government. So with that, I'd love to take any questions that you have.
Why were you beholden to vote for tax increases?
Because the city passed a bond in 2006.
You didn't have to vote to raise the taxes.
Well, we would have bankrupted our city, and we wouldn't have survived.
Would you not have, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it comes down to every city can survive even with it. I mean, there are options, you know, and to me, it's just.
There are no options, honestly. They're not. I mean, we took out $38 million of debt that the citizens approved. The citizens wanted. The citizens said, we're going to approve this debt, $38 million worth. The city council, before I was elected, sold the bonds. So what they do is they sell bonds out to the market to raise capital immediately, and they pay that back over time, right? The bonds were sold before I even took office.
So at the state level, if the state passed a bond for $1 billion before you get elected, just argument's sake, and they came to you and said, hey, we've got to raise taxes, we've got to pay for this bond.
If the citizens voted for it and the state legislature sells the bonds, you have no other choice. Or else you go bankrupt.
You have a choice. You have a choice.
No, you don't.
Yes, you do. You do as an individual have a choice.
Well, I think what the point is making is what was the options in terms of if not voted, in terms of what was the level of cuts of other services that would have been, because you still have to pay for the bond. We have that same issue here, folks, in Plano right now with the school district, but you've got the option of cutting other services, and it's actually being a smaller city. I know that there's not as much leeway. What was the level of the issue here?
That's a great question. So options, right? What were your options? Number one, bonds were sold.
Yeah.
So you either had to raise taxes to pay for the bonds, or, well, you could, it's a $38 million bond. Our budget's only $20 million. So, I mean, we could have laid off every employee of the city, and we could have defaulted on the debt, which would have not only bankrupted our city, but also caused a lawsuit because the citizens voted to approve. State law says that you have to pay for the bonds. The citizens voted. The citizens, we the people, went to the polls and voted to pay for these bonds. After a citizen committee said, what do we want to have bonds to pass? So those were our options. There were very few. But here's to your second part of your question. Here's what we did. We actually saved $3 million on the bonds by not spending all the money, and we were able to apply that back to the tax rate over the course of 2 years, which delayed the tax increase. The tax increase ended up happening, but we delayed it a couple of years. But here's what we also did. We took on thousands of square feet in a new municipal complex. We took on acres of manicured landscaping around the municipal complex. We took in all these software licenses for all the new software that went into the new building and our upgraded technology. We did all of that and absorbed that cost into the budget without having to raise taxes for those purposes. The tax increases over 2 years were in place, 16 cents to cover the bond debt. So it's not a happy
The
story.
tax increases were sunset?
I'm sorry?
Were those tax increases sunset?
No, cities don't really work that way. The way that it is that when you have bond debt and you accrue this debt, it takes an X amount of time to pay that debt off, depending on when the bonds are called, and you can't pay it off early. See, unlike a mortgage, when you take out a mortgage in your house, you can, if you win the lottery or something, you can go pay off that bond there. Well, the mortgage, excuse me. Bonds, you sell bonds, bond holders take those for, let's say, a 30-year period, and they hold on to those, and you can't pay them off early without huge penalties. But even then, you have to have a lot of money. And so Angie and her husband are both CPAs, and so they're probably going to tell you something different, but that's the way the city does it.
We're going to have to.
Yeah, excuse me, I never realized that the gloves are all off, okay? But thank you for asking real good questions. But let me share this with you. Since you started to attack me, and if I sit here, you don't want to elect somebody who, any elected official doesn't know how to defend you. So I'm going to stand up and say this, okay? First, Mr. Patterson, during his 4-year service, he raised the property tax by 25%. Property tax is 25%. And that's the highest, his city actually has the highest property tax rate among all the 4 major cities in our district. Okay? That's true, okay? Second, well, he explained that because of the debt issue, but listen, we are CPAs. We know you are, thank you, sir. There are other ways. 2 years ago, remember the taxes we were facing the big time, the squeeze because of economic downturn? We didn't raise taxes, we cut spending. By the way, the information you were given,
To be fair, though, we need to make sure we're keeping this on time.
Yeah.
This wasn't supposed to be a formal.
Yeah, this
thank
is a
you,
form
thank you.
for-
So, I have
directed
the
for him, it
information
wasn't
here.
intended
If you
for
want to
all.
discuss with me, thank you. I didn't want to, but he started a.
Angie.
We
I'll
need to keep
sit
the
down.
control
If
meeting.
you want to talk to me, I'll be glad, and I have a solid
we
data
need to
from
control
city's
meeting.
website, city website.
Please.
So in closing, I'll say that in 2011, the state did cut a lot of spending, but also there were a lot of accounting gimmicks, and they moved a lot of money around, and I'm sure you are familiar with that, where the state of Texas actually deferred payments to this legislative session from 2 years ago by deferring payments, and in my opinion, that's not balancing the budget. When I'm there, I will vote for a balanced budget that does not have all these accounting gimmicks that you see played out in the state. So I'd love to take any more questions if we have time.
We're calling it because we got one more candidate we have to hear from.